I'm staying at Mia's tonight, don't wait for me. His tone was casual, as if casually announcing, I forgot to buy bread. He didn't even bother to mask his indifference with a hint of pretense. I stared at the screen, my fingertips icy cold. My heart felt as though it had been brutally sliced open by a pair of icy scissors, so agonizing that even my breath trembled, but all I managed to say, syllable by syllable, was, thanks for letting me know. I turned around and walked into our bedroom. I pulled out a long-forgotten cardboard box and began packing away every single one of his shirts, every pair of sneakers, and those promises he'd made in passing, promises I'd once treasured so deeply, promises that had kept me awake at night, all of them now reduced to shards that pierced me like daggers. By midnight, I'd piled up everything he'd ever owned at the doorstep of Mia's apartment, treating it like a heap of worthless trash. At 3 a.m, just as panic finally started to grip him, my phone lit up. The call came from the man who'd been so certain I'd swallow my anger and always give in. But this time I didn't. It was that very night when I personally crushed the past, and everything changed utterly. My name is Olivia Cole, and before I share what's next, I wish so badly that you were right there with me on the other side of the screen. You don't have to say much at all. Just type "I'm here" in the comments, or let me know which city you're watching from, that'd be enough. I've always wondered, how many hearts will my story touch? How many souls, just like mine, who've struggled in the darkness, will it warm? Sometimes, just knowing that someone's listening is enough to give someone on the verge of giving up the strength to take one more step forward. Thank you for staying with me. Now, let me tell you my story, slowly, piece by piece. If my journey resonates with you, if you've been through it all, felt the pain, and after being betrayed, still managed to grit your teeth and put yourself back together, please, do subscribe to this channel. Your support can help more voices like mine be heard. No one should have to weather those heart-wrenching moments alone. We all deserve to be seen and to be caught when we fall. My name is Olivia Cole, and when I turned 27, I thought I'd finally grasped the life I'd been dreaming of. My apartment on Venice Beach in Los Angeles was my reward for years of pulling all-nighters, rushing to meet deadlines, and staying up late into the night, poring over pitches and ideas. As a new media strategist, I'm drawn to this place's crisp, clean lines, the soft morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, and the vibrant, lived-in atmosphere. The mingling aromas of coffee wafting from neighborhood cafes, and the murmur of passers-by blending together in a warm, human symphony. Every day when I wake up, I pay my rent myself, stock the fridge, and tend to the plants on my windowsill. For so long, I genuinely believed that financial independence meant emotional stability. And for a while, I really did believe it. 8 months ago, my fiancé, Ethan Hunt, moved in. With a smile as bright as the sun and a promise to build our little home together, he won my trust completely and filled me with anticipation for our wedding and our shared future. At the time, I was absolutely certain that choosing him was the right decision. He'd listen patiently when I talked about work challenges, make me hot cocoa when I stayed late, and tell me, I can't wait to marry you. I treasured every tiny, tender moment we shared. Even when things started to take a turn for the worse later on, I refused to admit it. After all, when you deeply love someone, you instinctively want to hold on to their original, unaltered self. But subtle signs of something amiss began creeping in unnoticed. Ethan started coming home late more and more often, brushing off my questions with excuses like business dinners or overtime. His phone, once left lying around casually, now always face down, and he'd quietly changed its password. Late at night, he'd find himself liking Mia Carter's posts. His temper grew increasingly volatile. Even the smallest thing would set him off, and sometimes he'd suddenly disappear for hours at a time, returning without ever mentioning where he'd been. Deep down, I knew he'd changed, but I desperately suppressed that thought, forcing myself to trust him. All the while, I silently noted every single odd detail. The first crack finally tore open. The bank sent a reminder about an overdue payment, revealing that Ethan had taken out a consumer loan I'd never known about. I held up the bill and asked him about it, but he accused me of making a big deal out of nothing, his eyes brimming with defensiveness that hurt even more than any lie he could have told. The second crack followed close behind. I found his travel bag, and the luggage tag showed an address in San Francisco, a stark contradiction to his story that he'd gone to Silicon Valley to meet clients. I didn't confront him right then. Instead, I quietly tucked the luggage tag away. That night, lying beside him, it felt as though a wall had risen between us. Though I knew our relationship was falling apart and that I'd already plunged into a nightmare, I still couldn't bring myself to wake up, because this was just the calm before the storm. The night everything collapsed felt no different from any other night. I was frying salmon in the kitchen, clinging to a sliver of hope, telling myself that we were merely going through a rough patch and hoping he'd come back to comfort me. When my phone vibrated, I thought it was a message from him just checking in. But the words on the screen felt like an ice brick smashing straight into my heart. "I'm staying at Mia's tonight. Don't wait for me." In an instant, I froze solid. My body turned icy cold, and even my breath seemed to stop. I stared repeatedly at the text message, my eyes burning with strain yet refusing to shed a single tear. My fingertips trembled as I typed back, "Thanks for letting me know." That calmness was almost chillingly indifferent. The rational part of me, always watching over every lie, had been waiting for this fatal signal all along. Suddenly, my father's words came flooding back. "When a man hides his phone, it means his heart's no longer with you." Back then, I'd thought those words were overly dramatic. But now, staring at the burnt salmon on my plate, I finally understood just how spot on they were. I'd ignored the warning signs for far too long, so long that even I'd stopped believing my own lies. The subtle clues of something being off had been creeping in, silently and steadily, like the tide rising unnoticed. Ethan started coming home late more and more often, and whenever I pressed him for details, he'd only give vague, evasive answers, talking about client dinners or last-minute overtime. The phone he used to leave casually in the entryway now lies face down, never to be lifted again. He quietly changed the password without so much as a single explanation. Sometimes he even takes his phone into the bathroom, deliberately turning up the shower's water noise to an unusually loud volume, lingering there far longer than usual. I can't help but notice his late-night social media activity either, especially when I see him liking Mia Carter's photo at 1:17 a.m. That timestamp feels like a tiny needle, piercing straight into my heart, yet I force myself to pretend I haven't seen it. His temper has grown increasingly volatile. Even the smallest things set him off, misplacing his keys, or me asking just one more question about his plans, all of it triggers his frown and impatience. Some nights, he'll suddenly disappear for hours on end, then return as if nothing had happened, refusing to say a word about where he'd been. Deep down, a voice inside me is screaming, "He's changed," but I keep desperately suppressing that voice. I told myself to trust him, stop overthinking, and remember all the beautiful moments, I kept telling myself. But another, more sober part of me was silently jotting down every single odd detail. I remembered that afternoon, when a gas station charge popped up on my credit card statement. That was the emergency reserve I'd set aside for just such occasions. He'd clearly said he'd been working overtime at the office that day and hadn't needed to drive at all. So why had he filled up the tank? My heart sank at that moment, yet I forced myself to come up with an excuse. Maybe he'd helped a colleague fill up their car. Now all those excuses have crumbled, leaving only one horrifying possibility. He'd planned all along not to come back. On instinct, I opened my social media app and scrolled through Mia's posts. In the background of the photos she'd shared of her afternoon tea, I recognized the renovation behind Ethan during our video call 2 weeks ago, the same light gray wallpaper, the same wall clock, even the very same throw pillows. He wasn't at the office that day at all. He was with Mia. Through the screen, from another woman's home, he looked into my eyes and said softly, "I've missed you." He said, "Wait for me to come back." That realization felt like a boulder pressing down on me, leaving me gasping for air. It wasn't until the acrid smell of burning seared into my nostrils that I snapped back to reality. I yanked the stove off, turned it off, and stared at the overcooked salmon in the pan, just as if I were staring at my shattered love. Something inside me had completely broken, yet something else was slowly rising from the ruins, a decision I hadn't fully thought through yet, but one I knew with absolute certainty I'd never go back on. I opened the closet in the hallway, pulled out a cardboard box left behind when we'd moved years ago, hugged it close, and walked step by step toward the bedroom. As the box unfolded with a creaking sound, I set it gently on the bed. The motion was precise, almost surgical, in its quietness, its firmness, its finality. Tonight, I won't cry. Tonight, I'm going to put an end to all this with my own hands and start living again. I opened the first cardboard box on the bed, and the bedroom light cast a pale shadow over Ethan's clothes. Standing there, I felt a complex mix of emotions, emptiness, sadness, but above all, a clear and unwavering certainty. There was no hysterical rage, no heart-wrenching agony. All that remained was a resolute enough. I could no longer share the same air under one roof with a man who had long since abandoned me emotionally. I began folding his clothes one by one, the shirts he wore to work, the hoodie I'd given him for last year's birthday, even the sweatpants still faintly scented with his cologne. With each piece I folded, it felt as if I were pulling a thread from my heart, slowly unraveling the tangled web of our shared past. I folded with unnaturally meticulous precision, surprising even myself, because only in this way, it seemed, could I prove to myself that I hadn't been broken. Shoes, belts, watches, chargers, headphones. Every single one of his belongings was carefully packed into the box. With each item I put away, my heart felt just a little lighter. As I tidied up the room, tiny fragments of memory surged forth like an incoming tide. The black coat he draped over my shoulders on that rainy day, the sneakers he insisted on buying during our weekend trip to Palm Springs, and the scarf he always said felt so comfortable to wear. Yet these memories didn't hold me back, they actually pushed me forward. Finally, I saw clearly how many half-hearted gestures I'd mistaken for tenderness, how many lies I'd treated as hope, and how I'd forcibly romanticized those patchwork bits of warmth into something called love. In the bathroom, I picked up the cologne he used every morning, the very scent that once made my heart flutter. Now, it smelled like a deception I'd been breathing in for months. I carefully placed his razor, toothbrush, hair gel, and even that vanity bag he treasured so dearly all into the box. With none of his belongings left on the counter, the space instantly felt clean and refreshed, as if it had finally shed a weight that didn't belong to it. In the living room, I found his gaming controllers tangled together in the corner of the sofa. He spent more time playing games than he did talking with me. Many nights, he'd curl up on the sofa, immersed in his gaming, while I sat beside him watching TV. We were physically close, yet our hearts seemed light years apart. I pretended it didn't bother me, pretended I didn't care, but only I knew just how deeply those silent nights hurt. I wrapped the gaming controllers in bubble wrap and slid them into the ever-growing pile of boxes. As I opened the desk drawer to gather up his last few possessions, a restaurant receipt slipped out, a receipt from an upscale sushi restaurant in downtown Los Angeles, dated precisely on the day he'd said he was heading to San Francisco to meet a client. The total clearly reflected two people's expenses. I stared at that receipt for a long time, yet my heart felt utterly calm, no turmoil, no pain, just a quiet sense of I knew it all along. This wasn't a sudden blow, rather it was the final stamp of approval on a truth I'd long since confirmed deep within myself. Underneath the receipt lay a contract from a wedding planning studio, the very same one we'd visited together just a few months ago. Back then, Ethan had hugged me close and whispered that he'd secretly handle the deposit, giving me a huge surprise, slowly turning our dream seaside ceremony into reality. But on that contract, there was nothing, not a single signature, not a date, not even a record of our consultation. That was the last straw, and also the most damning evidence. He'd never once considered a future with me. Those promises about our wedding had been nothing but lies, mere attempts to keep me happy. Before I knew it, 10 fully packed suitcases had already piled up by the door, This apartment had become both strange and familiar, stripped of the clutter he'd brought with him. For the first time in months, I felt my breath come easily again, a sense of relief disguised as sadness, the long-awaited rediscovery of space and freedom that was uniquely mine. At midnight, I loaded all the boxes into the car. The streets of Los Angeles were so quiet you could hear the evening breeze rustling through the palm trees, the calm after a storm. As I drove under the soft glow of streetlights, with each mile I traveled, the weight pressing down on my chest seemed to lift just a little bit more. Mia's apartment building stood shrouded in dim light. Without a second thought, I neatly stacked all the boxes in front of her door, placing a note on top, "Ethan's things since he chose this place. They'll stay here." Between the lines, there was no bitterness, no accusation, only a complete letting go. Back home, I immediately changed the locks, updated the access codes, and completely removed Ethan from every shared account and community parking permit. From that moment on, his presence was officially erased from my life. The quiet in the apartment felt unusually open and spacious. I flipped my phone, constantly glowing with notifications, face down on the sofa, finally reclaiming control over my emotions, which had been at his mercy for far too long. At midnight, Ethan's text messages flooded in, brimming with accusations and threats, calling me the one who ruined his life. I took screenshots to preserve the evidence, but chose not to reply. Shortly after, Chloe sent me a screenshot of a group chat. Ethan had been spreading rumors among their friends, claiming that I'd lost control of my emotions and fired him for no reason, portraying himself as the victim. Again, I simply saved the screenshot, letting the truth speak for itself. There was no need for me to argue or defend myself. At 3 a.m, a call came from an unknown number, and it was Ethan. His voice was choked with tears as he begged me to give us another chance, lying that staying at Mia's place had been a misunderstanding. Calmly, I told him, "It's over." No sooner had I hung up than Mia's voice came through the line. Ethan frantically tried to cover up his lies, but it was already too late. In that moment, all my lingering doubts vanished completely, and I finally let go of my self-deception. As the sun rose, I was in the kitchen brewing coffee when a notification popped up in my email, a bank fraud alert. Someone had attempted to make a purchase using the emergency credit card registered under my name. The very card whose number and PIN Ethan alone knew. The last shred of hope had finally vanished. I immediately called the bank, froze all the accounts he could access, and canceled that emergency card. As I listened patiently to the customer service representative explain the next steps, a cold sense of clarity slowly began to sink in. I'd thought I'd already gotten through the worst of it, but it turned out this was just the edge of the storm. The real impact was still yet to come. The day after the fraud alert, Mia's boyfriend, Jack, called me, accusing me of piling Ethan's boxes outside Mia's door. I sensed the pain and bitterness in his voice, so I calmly suggested he verify the truth for himself. After a brief silence, he hung up, no doubt he'd already guessed the answer. Shortly afterward, Ethan himself called, trying to talk his way out of it. He claimed staying at Mia's place was a test of our love and accused me of making a big deal out of nothing. I called him on his lies, made it perfectly clear that this is over, and then blocked every single one of his numbers. Kyson still refused to give up. In his social media circles, he spread rumors that I was paranoid and unfaithful, even pretending to be the victim in order to elicit sympathy. As I read those twisted, black and white accusations, all I felt was relief that I'd finally managed to free myself from his grasp. I didn't engage in any public back and forth with him on social media. Instead, I carefully gathered all the screenshots I'd saved, the text message he'd sent saying staying at Mia's place, the luggage tag photo from the San Francisco hotel, the double receipt from the Japanese restaurant, and the record of him liking Mia's posts late at night. Then I privately forwarded these pieces of evidence to our mutual friends who'd been comforting him under his posts. I didn't add a single word beyond this simple statement: "The truth is right here, believe it or not, it's up to you." Within just an hour, the comments that had once offered Kyson comfort gradually began to disappear. Some quietly deleted their own comments, Others sent me private messages apologizing, and still others simply blocked him altogether. Kai-sen's social media feed fell completely silent. He probably never imagined that I'd kept all this evidence, and even less did he expect that I'd directly expose his lies. In the afternoon, a call came in from an unknown number. It was the HR manager from Ethan's company. Her tone was polite yet serious as she asked me, "Would you be willing to disclose whether Mr. Ethan and Ms. Mia Carter have been involved in an inappropriate relationship?" It turned out that Mia was Ethan's colleague. Both worked as marketing specialists at an advertising agency. I had previously adjusted their job titles to ensure they met the requirements. Recently, the company had noticed that the two frequently took time off together and often exchanged private messages during work hours. Adding to this, someone had filed an anonymous complaint, prompting the company to reach out to me for verification. I didn't embellish or exaggerate. I simply stated objectively, they've often met privately. Ethan once claimed he was meeting a client when he went to San Francisco with Mia for the weekend, and they even spent the night at Mia's place. The HR manager remained silent for a few seconds, then said, "Thank you for your cooperation," before hanging up. Later that evening, Chloe sent me a message saying that both Ethan and Mia had been fired by the company because the company had a clear policy prohibiting inappropriate romantic relationships between coworkers, and the two had recently become negligent in their work, repeatedly taking leave under false pretenses, seriously violating company regulations. When I saw the message, I was in the middle of cooking dinner, and my hands didn't even pause. I'd known all along that what he'd done would eventually come back to haunt him. This wasn't my revenge, it was simply the consequence of his own choices. Sure enough, not long after, Ethan called from a new number. The moment the call connected, his furious roar came through. "Olivia, was it you who told the company? You did this on purpose. You've ruined my job, you're just a vicious woman." I pulled the phone away from my ear and waited until he'd finished yelling before calmly saying, "I was just telling the truth. It was you and Mia who broke company rules. Your own carelessness cost you your job. It has nothing to do with me." He still wanted to keep cursing, so I cut him off right there. "Ethan, from the moment you chose to deceive me, you should have expected things like this. Your job, your relationship, all of it, you destroyed with your own two hands. Don't try to shift the blame onto others anymore." Having finished speaking, I hung up the phone again and blocked that new number. I'd thought the matter would be temporarily put to rest, but the next morning, I received yet another fraud alert from my bank. Someone had tried to use my ID information to apply for a loan at a credit company. My heart sank. I didn't need to think twice to know it was Ethan, now unemployed and deeply in debt. He'd surely try the same old trick again, borrowing money under my identity. This time, I didn't hesitate at all. I immediately gathered all the evidence, the records of my previous credit card transactions, forged copies of the loan application, and screenshots of the bank's fraud alerts, and drove straight to the police station. Officer Lane was the one who greeted me. After listening carefully to my account of what had happened and examining the evidence I'd brought, he said with a serious expression, "This already constitutes identity theft and financial fraud. We'll open an investigation right away. Don't worry, I'll make sure to gather the evidence as soon as possible and hold him legally accountable," he said. He handed me a receipt for the report and reminded me to promptly freeze all my bank cards, change the password on my ID card, and close any unused credit accounts. As I stepped out of the police station, the sunlight warmed my skin, and I took a deep breath. The weight in my heart finally felt lighter by half. This time, I wouldn't put up with his behavior anymore. I was determined to wield the power of the law and protect my own rights. On Saturday afternoon, I was at home, tidying up my bookshelf, when suddenly I heard loud banging on the door accompanied by a man shouting, "Olivia, open the door. Open up." It was Ethan's voice, mixed with the voices of two other men. I went over to the peephole and peeked through. It was Ethan standing at the door, flanked by two burly men who were holding crowbars, clearly intending to break in by force. My heart leapt into my throat in an instant, but I forced myself to calm down. I immediately locked the door, grabbed my phone, started recording a video, and called my brother Noah. 10 minutes later, Noah arrived. Standing tall, About a head taller than Ethan, he exuded an innate sense of authority simply by his presence. "What do you think you're doing?" Noah's voice was icy cold as he stared straight at Ethan and the two men. Seeing Noah, Ethan's bravado instantly deflated, yet he still tried to maintain his composure and said, "This is between Olivia and me, none of your business. Just make her open the door." "She doesn't want to see you, so you'd better leave," Noah replied firmly, blocking the doorway and refusing to budge an inch. "If you keep making a scene here, I'll call the police." Ethan's two friends tried to step forward, but Noah sent them retreating with just one piercing glance. Just then, Chloe arrived. She was the one I'd contacted earlier, asking her to come over and help record a video as witness if she had time. As soon as she arrived, she pulled out her phone, started recording Ethan and the others, and shouted loudly, "You've broken into someone's home and are even holding crowbars." "I'm already recording. Police will be here any minute now." When Ethan saw Chloe recording them and remembered that he was still under police investigation, his face instantly turned deathly pale. He wanted to fire off a few harsh words, but before he could say a thing, the siren of a police car suddenly echoed in the distance. It was me who'd just sent a message to Officer Lane, and he'd immediately dispatched a colleague. As soon as the officers arrived, they stepped forward and quickly subdued Ethan and the two men. Ethan struggled and yelled, "I didn't break into anyone's home. This is my girlfriend's house." Officer Lane pulled out the receipt from MY report, reviewed the video Chloe had recorded, and said coldly, "Mr. Ethan, you're suspected of identity theft and financial fraud, and now you've also attempted to illegally enter someone else's residence. You'll have to come with us for questioning." As soon as those two men realized the situation had escalated, they immediately claimed they'd been tricked into coming by Ethan and began accusing him one after another. Seeing the people around him turn against him, and then noticing that I was standing behind Noah, staring at him with a cold, icy gaze, Ethan finally lost all his strength. He stopped struggling and let the police cuff him. As he passed by me, he paused briefly, his eyes filled with a complex mix of emotions. His voice was hoarse when he said, "Olivia, I really messed up. Can you give me another chance?" I looked at him without the slightest ripple in my heart. Instead, I simply said calmly, "Ethan, it wasn't betraying me that was your mistake. It was that you never respected me, never cherished our relationship, and never respected yourself. You don't need my forgiveness. What you really need is to forgive yourself." After the police took Ethan away, Noah patted my shoulder gently and whispered, "Don't be afraid, I'm here for you." Chloe walked over and gave me a hug. "You're really so brave, Olivia." I smiled, my eyes growing slightly warm, but not from sadness, rather from relief. The stones that had been weighing down on my heart had finally all been lifted. Over the next few days, while cooperating with the police investigation, I began to reorganize my apartment. I cleaned away every last trace of Ethan's presence, repainted the bedroom walls, replaced the curtains with new ones, rearranged the books on the bookshelf, and even bought a few fresh potted plants to place on the windowsill. Sunlight streamed in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, falling softly on the brand-new curtains and the tender green leaves of the plants. The whole apartment felt suddenly bright and alive. I'd finally reclaimed a space that was truly mine, a feeling of peace and contentment unlike anything I'd ever known. A week later, Jack sent me a message, Mia's boyfriend. "Thanks, Olivia," he said. I later asked Mia, and she admitted everything about her affair with Ethan. "I've already broken up with her. It's painful, but I'm actually relieved not to have been kept in the dark all along." He then asked me if I'd like to grab a cup of coffee together, not for any other reason, just the two of us, both betrayed, comforting each other a bit. After thinking it over, I replied, "Sure thing. Let's meet this weekend afternoon at that cafe on the corner." That weekend, the cafe was bathed in golden sunlight. Jack sat across from me, his voice calm as he began to talk about his relationship with Mia, about the agony he'd felt when he finally uncovered the truth, and about the sense of relief he now felt. Slowly, I started sharing my own story too, how I'd gone from being utterly shattered at first to gradually waking up, and how I'd taken small steps, one by one, to arm myself and protect myself. We didn't pity each other. Instead, we simply listened quietly to one another, as if we were hearing the story of another version of ourselves. As I was leaving, Jack said, "Thanks for listening to me all this time. Now I finally understand leaving the wrong person isn't a loss, it's a liberation." I smiled and nodded. Yeah, exactly, a liberation. Another month passed, and then the police station called with some news. Ethan had been charged with identity theft, financial fraud, and attempted illegal entry into someone else's home. He'd likely be sentenced to prison. His mother had called me several times, sobbing and begging me to drop the charges, saying that Ethan was still young and couldn't have his whole life ruined. I felt deeply sorry for her, but I still refused. "Auntie," I said, "I understand how you feel, but what he did, he has to pay the price. It's not that I'm being cruel, it's that he needs to learn to take responsibility for his actions. If I forgive him this time, he'll just do it again and hurt even more people in the future." She was silent for a long while, then finally said, "I'm sorry," before hanging up. Days passed one by one, and my life gradually returned to normal. I threw myself back into work, taking on several new projects and thriving in them. Chloe and I often dined together and went to the movies, and I stayed closely connected with Noah, too. I even signed up for a floral design class. Every evening after work, I'd spend time arranging flowers and plants, living a life that was both fulfilling and peaceful. One evening, I sat on the balcony, gazing at the lights below, holding a warm glass of milk in my hands. A gentle breeze swept through, carrying the fragrance of flowers and plants. Suddenly, I found myself thinking about that night several months ago, the night Ethan sent me a text message, the night I packed up his belongings and stacked his boxes outside Mia's door. That night, I'd thought my life was utterly ruined. But looking back now, I realize it was actually the turning point of my life. I didn't let that betrayal make me lose hope in love, and I no longer shut myself off just because of past hurts. I've simply come to realize that before we can love others, we must first learn to love ourselves. Before we can trust someone, we must first see clearly who they really are. Leaving the wrong person isn't cowardice, it's courage. Believing that you deserve better isn't arrogance, it's clarity. The me today is no longer the Olivia who would compromise herself and deceive herself just to hold on to someone. I've learned to say no, to stand up for myself, to protect myself, and to walk forward alone in the darkness. I know the road ahead is still long, and there may still be storms along the way, but I'm no longer afraid. Because I know I have the courage to face anything and the strength to rebuild a life that's truly my own. If you've also experienced betrayal, if you're struggling in the darkness, if you feel like you're about to give up, please remember this. You're not alone. What doesn't knock you down will ultimately make you stronger. What hurts you will eventually help you grow. Please believe. You deserve better love, a better life, and to be treated gently by this world. Don't be afraid to leave, don't be afraid to start over, and don't be afraid to be yourself. As long as you don't give up on yourself and as long as you're willing to believe in yourself, you'll surely step out of the darkness and welcome your own sunshine. Thank you all for sticking with me this far. May we all awaken through our wounds, rise again from the ruins, bravely choose ourselves, and live the lives we truly desire. If you'd like, feel free to share your stories in the comments. Let's cheer each other on and grow together. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you next time.